Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for everyone who's been waiting for me, and welcome to all of our members, subscribers, and viewers. Let's just give ourselves a sec to make sure everything's up and live and running before we begin with tonight's live stream. We've had quite an intense day today, and there's a lot to talk about. And as usual, I hope I can read between the lines as to what's happening, read up what everyone's saying, and obviously deliver it to everyone. And it looks like we're up and live and everything is working properly. Again, welcome everyone. Welcome to our subscribers, members, all of the usual live streamers, our moderators. Thank you so much for everyone who's been waiting for me. And as usual, welcome to everyone new to this channel. I see so many new viewers and subscribers. To welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for your support. If you are new to our live streams, these are primarily to have more extended, detailed talks. I still post videos that are short and brief for people who prefer just short snippets of news as to what's happening, live updates with the regular things that we talk about, the regular topics that we speak about. The live stream is usually more intense, more thorough, and I obviously give you a platform to speak, to share your thoughts, to share your views, and obviously ask any questions. If you have any, that I would be more than happy to address. And again, apologies in advance if I'm unable to reach all of your comments. I see many people obviously participate and still do. I will catch you at some point, don't worry. But I apologize in advance just for the limits of time and obviously the levels of messages that we receive. So I wanted to talk primarily about the latest speech for Joe Biden, which looks like it's a step closer to a ceasefire. We've had a speech from Joe Biden. We've had a couple of responses from Israel. No official rejection or approval. We've had threats from Netanyahu's closest allies that form the backbone of his government, saying that they will withdraw from the government, that I will be sharing shortly with you, which indicate that Benjamin Netanyahu is potentially could agree to the ceasefire. However, based on the pattern that we've seen so far, Israel is very stubborn. It's very much genocidal all the way, and Benjamin Netanyahu is looking to constantly expand and push the war. And one very important thing before I continue, Netanyahu cares primarily about Benjamin Netanyahu. So if he would agree to a ceasefire, he would want to agree to his future. He would want to save and protect his future. Excuse me. So as long as Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't have this protection for the day after the ceasefire, he will most likely not agree to a ceasefire, because Benjamin Netanyahu led Israel to 6 elections in 7 years just because of his persistence and his carelessness about Israel as well. Now, pushing the country, if we just take that, and you need to understand the man's pattern, if you push a country for so many elections at such a short space of time, that requires a lot of resources. That requires a lot of money, billions. And you shut down certain aspects of the company, and you hurt the government, the country, and you hurt the government's prosperity. And in many cases, you stir divisions that are completely unnecessary. And it takes its toll on the country, having constant elections just because it's Benjamin Netanyahu who wants to remain in power, because many people in Israel had a problem with him as an individual, not even his party, and said we will never form a government with him because they've experienced him previously. Everyone who came across Benjamin Netanyahu, apart from his traditional allies who just want to be in government for their own purposes, primarily the parties that represent the Orthodox communities, he had people trying him and hating him, and they don't want to continue with him. So it's very important to note that. Munzer Shihab, by the way, thank you so much for your super thanks. I really appreciate that. Super thanks are really hard to ignore. They're very blunt and colorful. Thank you so much for that. I really do appreciate that, and everyone contributing. So he had this track record. He split the Israeli society with the judicial reform before the war. And the reason I'm telling you that, and I know, excuse me if some of you already know that, but the reason I say that is to contextualize. You see, many people don't like to contextualize, which gives us more of a duty to contextualize and give you a bit of a pattern so that people can understand and have a true image as to what's going on. Many people would hardly say anything. You know, if you come across mainstream media, you wouldn't hardly see anything. 1, 2, 3 minutes, and that's it. Oh, a slight escalation, as if nothing is happening. But if you really want to know what's happening and you want to establish a solid opinion, you hear both sides very thoroughly. You listen to what they have to say, look at their patterns, what they've done before, what they're doing, to translate what they're doing now, and potentially expect what they're about to do. So he's done all of that before. He split the country. Splitting the country during the judicial reform in Israel was a massive national security threat to Israel. Why? Because Israel as a country has to be united on racism, united on supremacy, united with the IDF. And Benjamin Netanyahu shattered that because he wanted to take full control on the judicial system in Israel and have the power to appoint judges, and having the judiciary system belonging to politics, which is something very harmful and is usually a sign of autocracy, of an authoritarian regime. Because in every properly functioning country, you need to have a separation in powers: the judiciary, the administrative, and the politics, obviously, the politicians. So he's had this pattern. He split the nation. He caused a lot of harm. He received a lot of warning from the military establishment that you're causing a lot of harm to the state of Israel by doing that, because many people are seeing us divided. You've had people sending him letters. We're seeing the recent letters that people are sending him, pilots in the IDF and what have you, saying that we will not serve, alongside people who ran away from the army, people fleeing the country. It's a catastrophic situation there. It was already evident from before. Yet despite all of that, he was still pushing ahead. What does that signal? That the man is a narcissistic psychopath who only cares about himself and his political career, his ambitions. And to be fair, I mean, if he's working for a company or what have you, cool, you know, you're stubborn, you're ambitious, you push your way through. But if you're leading a country and you lead deaths and cause lots of destruction, and that's a different story. And even in the corporate world, that could be a problem, such a psychopathic and narcissistic personality. He didn't agree to anything so far. And he has these maniacs pushing him. Now, he's seeing the pattern. He's seeing that the United States administration, which Israel heavily relies on, it's the lifeline of Israel. Israel is the US. What are we talking about here? Israel is a Western imperial neo-colonialist project in the region. It's not a natural presence. It's not a natural state. It's not something that's genuine. It's a made-up project to keep what is deemed as even Western interests in the Middle East, although there's a very big argument against that. Even the only Western interest that Israel is protecting is the military-industrial complex and some parts of the greedy elites, and that's it. Not the West as a collective. What do the Western populations have or gain from their government supporting a genocidal criminal country? What do they gain out of it? Nothing. Nothing whatsoever. It makes them feel ashamed that their governments support this genocidal state. That's the pattern that we see, and more people are being vocal about it. And many people in America, in Western countries, they're becoming more and more vocal that, hold on a second, this country doesn't serve our interests. They're serving the military-industrial complex by constantly pushing for wars, right, and greedy people in power, but not the populations of the Western countries. So what did Joe Biden exactly say? What is the response that we got from Israel? What's the response that we got from the resistance? And what's the response that we got from the people who hold Benjamin Netanyahu, Ben Gvir, and Bezalel Smotrich? We'll start off with Joe Biden. And let me elaborate here. This hasn't been submitted as a draft with specific wording and very much details. It was just a speech for Joe Biden, and the response from the Hamas representative, by the way, Osama Hamdan, elaborates on that, and I will also share some of the things that he said afterwards. With regards to Joe Biden, okay, so Joe Biden, he obviously had a televised speech in which he stated a couple of things. I'll read some of the main things that he spoke about, or all of it. If it's not too long, it doesn't look like it's very long, actually. So, Joe Biden, he said it's time to begin this new stage for the hostages to come home, for Israel to be secure, for the suffering to stop. It's time to stop the war, get the war to an end, for the day after to begin. This new proposal has 3 phases. The first phase would last 6 weeks. Here's what it would include: a full and complete ceasefire withdrawal of Israeli forces from all populated areas of Gaza, release of a number of hostages, including women, the elderly, the wounded, in exchange for the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. There are American hostages who would be released at this stage, and we want them home in addition to some remains of hostages who have been killed. They would be returned to their families, bringing some degree of closure for that terrible grief. Palestinian civilians would return to their homes and neighborhoods in all areas of Gaza. In the north, humanitarian assistance would surge with 600 trucks carrying aid into Gaza every single day. With the ceasefire, that aid could be safely and effectively distributed to all who need it. Hundreds of thousands of temporary shelters, including housing units, would be delivered by the international community. All that and more would begin immediately during the 6 weeks of phase 1. Israel and Hamas would negotiate the necessary arrangements to get phase 2, which is a permanent end of hostilities. Now, I'll be straight with you. There are a number of details to negotiate. Okay, he's clarifying that. That's good. To move from phase 1 to phase 2. Israel wants to make sure that its interests are protected, but the proposal says if the negotiations take longer than 6 weeks for phase 1, the ceasefire will continue. As long as negotiations continue, then phase 2, there will be an exchange of the release of the remaining living hostages, including male soldiers, Israeli forces with full withdrawal from Gaza, and as long as Hamas lives up to its commitments for a temporary ceasefire, that would become, in the words of the purpose of the Israeli proposal, cessation of hostilities. There's a slight problem with this translation. Permanently end. Quote, the cessation of hostilities will finally end. And in phase 3, a major reconstruction plan for Gaza would commence, and any final remains of hostages who've been killed would be returned to their families. That's the offer that's now on the table, and we've been asking for. It's what we need for the people of Israel. The people of Israel should know they can make this offer without any further risk to their own security, because they've devastated Hamas for over 8 months. At this point, Hamas no longer is capable of carrying out an October 7th, which is one of Israel's main objectives to this war, and quite frankly, a righteous one. This is truly a decisive moment. Israel has made their proposal. Hamas says it wants a ceasefire. This deal is an opportunity to prove whether they really mean it. Hamas needs to take the deal for people all over the world have called for a ceasefire. It's time to raise your voices and demand that Hamas come to the table, agrees to this deal, and ends the war that they began. These were the words of Joe Biden. Now, before I go into the responses, here's my take on what Joe Biden says. Obviously, Joe Biden would represent the U.S. with his terminology, with what he says about Hamas, etc. We all know that. But number one, what do we establish from this? That the Palestinian resistance is imposing its will and conditions. Why? Because the same administration was completely backing Israel to demolish Hamas previously, okay? Why would I also say that it's showing the strength of the Palestinian resistance and the fact that they are imposing their will? The United States did not mention many of the things that they now mention. They didn't previously describe in so much detail the level of aid that Israel would end the war and the withdrawal and the reason. And by the way, it's very symbolic that the President of the United States himself is saying that. Okay, so people need to understand the number one cause of this speech is the perseverance and the success of the Palestinian resistance. Let it be very, very clear. Now that we've established that, what will Israel respond? So far, they're meeting. They're not only meeting, they have over 120,000 in accordance to the Israeli protesters are in the streets of Israel, next to the defense ministry, next to the Kiryat, all across in central Israel, protesting and pushing for a ceasefire. They protest previously. What we've understood from reports that we've had from Tel Aviv, from Israel today, is that these protests are unprecedented in numbers since the beginning of this genocide. Clearly, they've listened to Joe Biden, and they probably trust Joe Biden more than they trust Benjamin Netanyahu. And the fact that Joe Biden himself went out and delivered this speech with so much detail is putting Benjamin Netanyahu in a corner. Because Lord knows, whatever he says to Hamas, it's not like he has any sort of say on Hamas. No one has any say on Hamas apart from the Palestinian people. Hamas are people who look at the Palestinian rights. They have no other country has a say on them. Israel has had 8 months of genocide, killing every single living thing possible, ethnically cleansing, destroying everything, hospitals, massacres, children, babies, infants, women, wiping families off the face of the earth, water wells, wheat factories, farm, every single thing you can, the universities. Barbarism to the high heavens or high hell. And Hamas did not submit. What does that tell you? That these people look beyond And they cannot be affected by military pressure or genocide or the worst crimes against humanity. Why? Because they've proven that these people are people of faith, and they stick to their guns and they stick to their morals, and they know their enemy very well. You're talking about the descendants of the Nakba survivors, the descendants of the 67 second ethnic cleansing campaign, because in 1948 you had 750,000 ethnically cleansed. In 67, a further 300,000. So 1 million, right, ethnically cleansed and displaced in 1948 and 1967. You're talking about movements and resistance movements who were established by leaders who had their families expelled, who saw and witnessed genocide when they were children. So they know what they're talking about, then they know who they're dealing with, and they don't trust the goodwill, if there is such a thing, of Israel. Israel still officially hasn't submitted a response. What we did get, though, is that they are studying the response. In the meantime, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, the people who put most pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu, they came out with statements that signal that there is some sort of consideration to this deal. What did they both say? Ben Gvir said, if Netanyahu executes the deal, we will dissolve the government. He also strongly criticized the deal presented last night by Joe Biden. He said this is a promiscuous deal, which is a victory for terrorism and a security threat to the state of Israel. Agreeing to such a deal is not the absolute victory, but the absolute defeat. He also added, we will not allow the end of the war without the complete elimination of Hamas. If the Prime Minister executes the promiscuous deal under the conditions published today, which mean the end of the war and the renouncing of Hamas, Otzma Yehudit will dissolve the government. Smotrich also said, we will not agree to the deal. He said that they would resign if they agreed to these outlines presented by Joe Biden. We will not agree to the end of the war before the destruction of Hamas. Not to, what did he add? He won't allow the people back to the north, and not to the wholesale release of terrorists who will return to murder Jews, as he describes that. We demand the continuation of the fighting. So he's very specific. Not only he doesn't want to end the war, he wants to destroy Hamas. He doesn't want the people to go back, and he doesn't want to release Israeli prisoners. This is Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben Gvir. Again, these people apply most pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu. They apply more pressure than him, than the majority of the Israeli population, who don't support Netanyahu and despise him and call him the crime minister, and who say he has blood on his hands, and who say he's murdering Israelis. And again, you're not talking about the people who strongly oppose the concept of war here, right? There are people who are to the core against genocide, but the majority, they just don't want Netanyahu. And to them, what Benjamin Netanyahu is doing is a threat to Israel and its security, and he's killing Israelis in the process, and they believe that what the Palestinian resistance says is more truthful than what their governments say. This is constantly repeated by the people in the protests in Israel. What did Hamas say? And what did the mediators say? That's very also important. Osama Hamdan, the representative of Hamas in Lebanon, is a very senior figure, and he is very much involved in these negotiations. He said that we are looking at this in a positive manner. He obviously criticized the US for not agreeing to the deal that Hamas agreed on, especially seeing as the head of the CIA was present when they accepted on it and when they went ahead with it, and the fact that they did not apply pressure on Israel at the time. He also added that what the US president stated wasn't very detailed, and that was confirmed, by the way, in the speech of Joe Biden. The fact that there are more details to explore, there are more things to speak about. So he said, we're looking at it positively, but we need a confirmation of the details. Now, from what Joe Biden said, he is confirming some of the key elements of Hamas, and he declared them. He said them outright, and that could well be a thing that he said to apply pressure on Netanyahu, because he mentioned some of the core things that the Palestinian people want, that Hamas wanted, that the resistance wanted, which is the cessation of the war, ending the war. He even added the fact that you need to continue the ceasefire even if you don't agree on the second phase, which is very important. That wasn't there even before. And it's a very key thing that Israel cannot engage in the war again if the first phase ends and then they say, oh, it ended and we haven't agreed, so we're going to go to war again like it's done with the temporary ceasefire. So that's another protection thing for the Palestinians. And also the fact that he was talking about rebuilding, the fact that he's talking about increasing the aid trucks. Before the 7th of October, we had 500 trucks entering Gaza on a daily basis. Now he's saying 600 a day. And the fact that he spoke about the temporary housing, he spoke about everything, and he spoke about rebuilding. All of that is to apply pressure on Netanyahu, by the way. And don't mind the fact that he said, oh, we ask Hamas to agree on this. It's not that they do anything with Hamas, by the way. Careless about them. Do you think Hamas cares about, applying pressure on them? They weren't under pressure when this genocide was happening. So clearly, there's something in favor of the Palestinian people. And again, it's the minimum requirement, by the way. It's the minimum requirements here. So what Israel will respond will elaborate further as to where things would be going. Now, we still haven't had a statement from Benjamin Netanyahu. And by the way, we haven't had comments from his party. Okay, so previously when his party had a problem, the Likud party, they would be vocal about it, alongside Smotrich and Ben Gvir. But so far they didn't say anything, signaling that they might be in line with Benjamin Netanyahu, and they might be open for an agreement on this deal. Another thing that happened that we didn't see before is that there was a press release that was jointly released by Qatar, Egypt, and the United States. They said the principles that were signaled by President Biden, they gather the requirements of all parties in an agreement that will result to serving multiple interests. They also added, as mediators, we call on Hamas and Israel to form an agreement that will implement the principles that were outlined by President Biden. This deal will end the suffering for the people of Gaza and also the suffering of the hostages and their families. This agreement is a roadmap for a complete and total ceasefire to end this war, to end this conflict. So they're clearly trying to apply pressure. Again, Hamas, the only thing that we're getting from they're viewing it in a positive manner. From the Israeli side, and I can check now just in case we've had something very recent, if they released anything. No, we still don't have an official response from the Israeli government. All we had is the release, press release, the statements from Ben Gvir and Smotrich. And again, if Netanyahu agree, seeing as he received these heavy threats from Ben Gvir. So will Netanyahu agree knowing that his government will collapse immediately? The question is, does he have a safety net? Did someone provide him with a safety net? So what's most likely happening simultaneously before the agreement, and people should understand that, before the agreement of Benjamin Netanyahu on such a deal, is if he will have a protective net to replace Otzma Yehudit and Hatziunut Hadatit, Jewish Strength and Religious Zionism, the two parties that are led by Ben Gvir and Smotrich. You're talking about approximately 16, 17 maybe. It's not going to be like a small party. He would need something big. It's difficult, but then again, Benjamin Netanyahu, to be fair to Benjamin Netanyahu, he proved previously that he can get himself out of trouble. He can form a government with the very bare minimum required, and he does that, although there's a risk for a government collapse, which happened before, and then he did it again. So don't be surprised if he does get someone. Okay, some people previously doubted that he would be able to have a coalition, and he did. So if he has someone to replace them, or if he has some sort of an agreement for the day after, he's increasing in the polls. But then again, even if he thinks about the polls, he would have to think about his coalition after the elections take place. All of that is being considered by Benjamin Netanyahu, and that's why you will have a delay about the response, or that he will again submit to the will of Itamar Ben Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. And let me open the space up for all of you now. Sarah Amnadis, thank you so much for your super thanks. I really appreciate it. And obviously, Munzer Shihab, thank you very much for your super thanks. Much appreciated. Okay. Sia saying, I thought the ceasefire proposal was already rejected by Israel. That was the previous proposal. That wasn't this current proposal. And again, this current proposal is the outline by Joe Biden. So it's still not in writing. It still doesn't have all of the details, but the outlines themselves are quite positive, to be fair, because they clearly indicate the ending of the war. They protect the people of Gaza from another war if there is no agreement in the first phase, allowing people to the north. It's basically there confirming that, like I said, the Palestinian resistance has managed to impose its will. Proving what? That people understand the language of power and perseverance and resistance. If they gave up before, they wouldn't have got this. Israel would be in Gaza and already putting settlements in. People would be establishing these settlements over the bodies of the dead innocent people. Inner Sanctum is asking me, why am I unsubscribed? You see, because there are things that happen that automatically unsubscribe people. There's this jinn that operates within YouTube, right? Unsubscribes people from people like me, or bans them from commenting sometimes. I wonder what type of jinn it is. But I always warn my subscribers, look, you will get unsubscribed sometimes. What you do is resubscribe, report to YouTube, do the things that you can do. And apart from that, what else can we do? We do the things that we can do. But I do get that. I do get that. And sometimes people say that they can't see comments or comments disappear. I had a video deleted a couple of days ago that you can watch on Rumble, by the way. It doesn't include anything like whoa or what have you, basic. But clearly certain messages, you can push it a bit too far. And again, I respect each platform's decisions to have their own policies. At the end of the day, I am promoting content here on this platform. So I will have to work, in accordance with the guidelines that are there. I might not agree with them. I might criticize them. But this is what we have. Kate is saying the proposal only covers Gaza. It will not stop illegal Israeli settlers from attacking Palestinians in the West Bank. Will Hamas continue to defend the West Bank? And it will not stop the conflict, and it will not solve the conflict. And this is not a long-term solution. All we're talking about is a temporary relief and an ending to the genocide in Gaza, or at least a temporary ending, which is still better than a continuation of the genocide. And I said that before, there's two options ahead of us: a temporary deal with an ongoing heightened conflict, or continuation of the war with more destruction up until we solve this once and for all. Clearly, the priority is to end the genocide and reach some sort of a deal. That doesn't mean things will end. You have people threatening now the West Bank parts with the same fate of Gaza. Smotrich said the other day, we will turn Tulkarem into Gaza. We'll commit a genocide in the West Bank. And they're being enabled, so it will not end. And you're asking, will Hamas defend the people? Hamas is limited in power in the West Bank. The protection of the people, the Palestinian people in the West Bank, lies in the hands of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, led by Abu Mazen Mahmoud Abbas and his authority. Are they doing the job? They're not. Of course they're not. They're allowing Israel to invade parts, to cause destruction. They've enabled the squatter establishments for the past 30 years, and they participate in assisting Israel in certain cases. Now, there are some people who go outside of that scope and these policies and help the resistance, and that's still limited, but still causes trouble for Israel. And that's why you have such big statements. But this temporary ceasefire, if it does happen, it will definitely not solve the problem, because the problem lies within the concept of apartheid supremacy, racial, religious supremacy, racism, violence, and occupation, and the lack of equality and justice. Obviously, there will never be absolute justice on this earth. We know that, but there are levels of injustice, right? And with regards to equality, Israel blatantly doesn't apply equality. Israel is a supremacist. It's a Jewish supremacy. It's a supremacy for Jewish people, as they describe it. It's a nation state for the Jewish people. That's what it is. And they look at other people as below them. So that regime of religious supremacy must end once and for all, and you need to implement equality between the Jordan River to the sea so that people can have the right to vote freely. You need to have addressed some of the historical rights of the Palestinian people too, and only then will you have a prospect of a long-lasting solution. Not a two-state that Israel already rejects, by the way, not just a temporary deal, and not a management of the conflict at the expense of the Palestinian people and their historical rights. So I hope that elaborates, and that question came from Kate. Talal Mansour, how do you translate the Eisenhower being targeted by Yemen? It's a response for the massacre that they committed. They killed approximately 16 innocent Yemenis, and over 50 were wounded. So the Yemeni Ansarullah, they could have targeted it before, but they avoided it. Why? Because they deal with the conflict in stages and steps. So to them, they had no reason, or they didn't want to reach this type of escalation before, but they're sending a message to the genocide coalition led by the United States and Britain, supporting this genocide by attacking the country that imposes a legitimate blockade against this genocidal criminal state, right? And they're sending them a message: if you target, we will increase. So to deter them, it's an act of deterrence. It's an act of deterrence, and that we have more in place. So don't go there. This is the message that they are sending them. That was from Talal Mansour. Keo994 saying Biden talking ceasefire is BS. He just wants to win election. It's BS. I totally understand the sentiment. People weren't saying anything about the civilians being slaughtered in Gaza from the beginning, and they started to change the tone the closer we are to the election. That's a completely valid point, and I totally sympathize with the sentiment of not trusting them. Absolutely. And however, like I said before, I'm here to analyze what people say. Obviously, he did say it. Things that they say, they have an impact. Obviously, we don't trust completely what they say, and that's absolute. But he said it. Obviously, there's an agreement or a partial, goodwill from Hamas. Israel is probably considering it. And the US threatened leverage and they implemented leverage. Again, not to prevent the genocide, not for the sake of the Palestinian people, but for the sake of keeping what is labeled as the US interest in preserving Israel, you see, because they want Israel. They want Israel. This is what we've established. They're worried about Israel's image more than Israelis are about their image, more than Netanyahu and the government and the Israeli population. And why is that? It's because they want to keep the regime of apartheid and supremacy in Palestine to have an ongoing conflict, but at a lower heat. They don't want things to get out of control. They don't want you to be complaining. They don't want people digging into history and their garbage from centuries ago and their mass genocides and their complicity and their crimes against humanity. They don't want you digging. It's more comfortable for them, for Israel to complete all of these atrocities at a low heat, brush it under the carpet in the dark. Zionism thrives in the dark. This evil thrives in the dark. Now that it's under the sun and all of the lights are on them, they don't like it. So it's a problem. But I totally understand your sentiment, by the way. And again, it's not really about trust. It's about the actions that are being taken. And what we're here to do, what I'm here to do personally is just to analyze what these people are saying, to try and see if there's any potential for an agreement, whether or not it's linked to the elections. Like everyone is aware of that by now. You have people who used to call support Israel fully from the beginning and massacring far more people on a daily basis than what they do now, supporting them, asking to support Israel, cutting water off, cutting oil, gas, everything, punish everyone. You say innocents are dying. No. Collateral damage. Hamas is hiding behind them. This is what they would tell you. Let me see what else we have. Jamie Dodger is saying British politics always ramp up racial hatred before an election. A lot of money has been pumped into this. Absolutely. And why do they pump up racial hatred? To play on the racist element of certain people who think, these people support us because we're the majority and we want the majority of your vote. Secondly, to stir division and affect the cohesion. People in power, they couldn't care less about social cohesion or people understanding each other, being open for each other. They want this because they want to divide and rule. Otherwise, how can people in power, and this is a criticism on this type of democracy that allows this, by the way, how can people in power push for such a hateful, bigoted rhetoric against communities in their own countries? How is that even possible? There should be strict guidelines when it comes to people in power. You can't say things that will be interpreted in a racist manner against a complete part of the country, no matter which part that is, by the way, what religion or what race or where they're coming from. That doesn't matter. What matters is you cannot have the power to say X people are all this, they're all the problem. But governments have been doing that for a very long time, and you're very right. It's very poisonous in Britain, like in many other countries too. And that must end. You need to have very rigid systems in place and guidelines for people in power. They are not allowed, they're not to be allowed to have certain comments against populations. Take, for example, you're talking about the UK. They were blatant and they were vocal about the fact that they had a hostile environment policy from the Home Office. They were bragging about it. And now Theresa May is saying, oh, I have regrets about this hostile environment policy that I implemented, which led to people dying because they were expelled from the UK, although they proved to the Home Office and the country that they were under a threat. And all of that, it doesn't make any sense. It's absurd. Irene Z is saying, I don't get notifications. That's the same thing with the unsubscriptions, right? Suppression. We work our way around it. So even if you have my notifications, you won't see them. Again, you need to visit my channel or type in my name and look on Gmail. But look, what I'm doing now, I'm uploading also, not the live streams yet. The videos, I'm uploading all of them on Rumble too. Just in case. I might have streams shared on multiple platforms. Some of you advised that I do them on X as well, and that's something that I'm also considering. Manuel, thank you so much for your super thanks. Kate is saying October 7th survivors living in USA, illegal settlers installed in Palestine, are suing pro-Palestinian students in the USA. I think pro-Palestinian students should counter-sue the other side. Yeah, it's important on the legal side, by the way. They have the Zionists, they work, they're always active on each level. The judicial side, the Hasbara, or the Hasbara. Ra in Hebrew means bad. So you need to have a counter measure as well. Absolutely. Jake Blue saying, is anyone else disappointed when they see the Israelis protest and there are more police than protesters? Don't they want peace and the hostages returned? This is what happens when you allow a country to be increasingly more and more authoritarian. Israel is a fascist state. Fascism thrives. Racism, bigotry is a core element. Racism, bigotry, fascism is how Israel was established. Religious supremacy, right? Religious supremacy imposed by immigrants from Europe using their victimhood that happened to them in Europe on the indigenous people of Palestine. And some people have the audacity to claim simultaneously, and it's fact in some cases, that they are Holocaust survivors and implement a Holocaust on the Palestinian people, including by gassing them, by the way. How absurd is that? We know what they're doing. We know they're using Judaism as a front, and we know they're using the Jewish people as a pawn to this neo-colonialist, racist, Western imperial project. But this is what they're doing. However, this is how Israel was established. Religious supremacy, religious, racial supremacy, apartheid, viewing others as below them. And that's not an ideology. The ideology of Zionism is a toxic, violent ideology that should be criminalized. This is a criminal ideology. They used to talk to you about the ideology of ISIS or Al-Qaeda, or whatever, that they supported, by the way. In many cases, make up and support these people. You have a state. You have an ISIS state. It's just that they speak in the name of Judaism. That's what you have in Israel. But no, Western leaders will proudly say, I'm a Zionist. Imagine a Western leader says, oh, I follow the ISIS ideology. They will be rotting in prison the next day, banned from everything, blacklisted for life. But Western leaders can say, I'm a Zionist. I believe in supremacy. I believe in ethnic cleansing. I believe in genocide. They can go out and say that. In Britain, in European countries, in the US, I'm a Zionist. You can go ahead and proudly say that. Zionism should be criminalized, should be outlawed. What are we talking about? But that's the world that you live in now. Saying that, and I know that the Israeli police is using obviously fierce brutality and draconian measures on the Palestinian citizens in Israel, and that reached the Israeli protesters too. I heard that today they weren't interfering that much. There were one or two arrests in Kaplan, but apparently they didn't interfere that much in the protests. MCFCCTID, thank you so much. Kio994 at OD. What does Hamas want to achieve right now? Is what they said from the beginning. The complete ending of the war, allowing people to go in every part, getting all of the aid in, including to the north, every part freely without Israeli dictation, removing all of the Israeli forces, having all of the necessary temporary relief for the Palestinians, and the rebuilding of Gaza with international guarantors, because they do not trust the Israelis. That's the short-term goal. And obviously, the release of prison. That's the short-term goal. Their long-term goal is to have the historical Palestinian rights in Palestine, the rights of the refugees to return, the rights of Palestinian statehood. You have their charter from 2017, that many people even manipulate that. Many people will tell you on mainstream media, Hamas charter says kill all of the Jews. Their charter from 2017, clauses 16 and 17, say specifically, we have no problem against Jewish people as people. We have a problem against violent occupying Zionism as an ideology that oppresses us. They didn't even just say Zionism on its own. And they believe in the concept of democracy and free elections and what have you. That's the long term. Short term, they want to end this. And this is in accordance to all of the other resistance movements. You have 13 resistance movements in this on the same umbrella with Hamas, by the way. Some of them are secular, some of them are leftist, some of them, and obviously, again, that's not something that you're told. You're sold the notion that it's in war between Israel and Hamas. Not a genocide against the Palestinian people, not the fact that the Palestinians have movements that resist Israel that don't have the same ideology as Hamas, for example. And all of that is important to know. Ram Plans is advising me to watch a video on Syrian analysis with the... Yeah, I'm sorry, your message went. On Syrian analysis with regards to plans up until 2035. Yes, I will. I hopefully will. Thank you so much for that. For those of you who don't know, by the way, I had a nice live chat with Kevork from Syrian Analysis yesterday. Make sure to go and view it on their channel. We spoke about the one-state solution. Oh my God, I'm missing so many people here for super thanks. I'm so sorry. Samantha Willie, thank you so much for your super thanks. Samantha saying, I got unsubscribed too. I just blame it on the menopausal brain, but it was YouTube. It was YouTube. Yeah, it was YouTube. Or the YouTube Jinn. I'm not sure how they operate. Thank you so much for that. Stephen Boros, thank you so much. You also said my notification also got bombed. Keep going, brother. Thank you. I will do. Thank you so much. And Rebecca Husseini, thank you very much for your super thanks. And Chocolate Pudding, thank you so much for your super thanks. You said, has there ever been an event that caused more spiritual awakening than this? Wow, that's such a nice observation. I mean, And before I address that, let me just thank Daniela Modus Cutter. Thank you so much. And Marvin Vergus is saying couple shekels for you, brother. Thank you so much for your super thanks. Peace. And thank all of you. I really appreciate all of your super thanks, by the way. But I think that's such a nice observation. Chocolate Pudding is saying, has there ever been an event that has caused more spiritual awakening than this? Well, you know what? No, probably. Do you know why? For several reasons. If you talk about the eras of the prophets, peace be upon all of them, you had much smaller communities, a much smaller population. Then it obviously started to reach the world. Now you have global countries with diverse religions and ideologies and faiths. So that was limited. If you want to say at a short period of time, then yes. And why? Because, and I always said that from the beginning, when you talk about Palestine, you're not just talking about a Palestinian Israeli political conflict. I mean, I always say that on top of the list, it's a case of human rights and lack of equality, technically speaking. Because if you had equality of rights in that particular part of the world, you wouldn't have had much of a problem. But it's also a religious thing. Why? Because it's the land that had most prophets across all of history, and it's sacred to Jewish people. It's sacred to Christians. It's sacred to Muslim populations across the world. Also, it has some of the most. Not only was it the land of prophets, it's also a land of many holy sites for the world's main religions. So all of that is important. It's a historical area that was visited, let's say, or controlled or occupied by so many different nations, by the Greeks, by the Romans, by other countries, other tribes historically. It's also a very interesting area geographically. It splits east and west, north and south in that area, right? So it has so many things to it, really. And it's not just about politics, I think. And that's what attracts people to learn more, and what many people find fascinating about it. And hopefully one day it will see the peace that it really deserves, and everyone can live there equally, and we can all go and visit in harmony and in peace. And Manfred S., by the way, thank you so much for your super thanks and for everyone who contributed. I'm sorry if I missed any, but so far that was the list that I had. Marvin Berg is saying, what nations have a Palestinian mission office? How many, any US or West? Interesting. There's a difference between mission and embassy, by the way. Embassy is a high level. For example, China has an embassy. And if you Google it, you'll find out exactly, because I'm not entirely sure about each and every one, if it's a mission or, for example, in Britain, it's the mission, right? An embassy has a higher status. And they would be in countries that recognize Palestine as a state. There are a few, and we're having more momentum, particularly in Europe, with more countries recognizing the Palestinian state and having an official Palestinian representation. If I'm not mistaken, by the way, in the US, it was downgraded at one point during the Trump era. And I might be wrong about that. But that's the US. And I'm sure that China has an embassy level, which is the highest level of representation. And obviously, the level of representation signals the country's view on Palestine and their actual position in general, by the way. That's why you'll see China more kind of supportive. They supported the initial ceasefire that Russia proposed, and Brazil as well. Tashikom is saying, what was the deal with genocide Joe proposed? Guidelines that meet almost all parties' needs, and it missed a couple of details. However, like I said, Hamas and the Palestinian side responded to it positively, but saying that it needed further elaboration. Israel hasn't officially agreed to it, but from just purely from what Joe Biden said, I think it definitely has positive elements that can be built upon. Zelda saying we need to ask why the West has been supporting an apartheid state for 75 years. People want answers, and that's why they want this to end ASAP. The West, or in particular Western powers, support apartheid for 76 years now. It's because this apartheid is an extension of their own ideology, their own supremacist entitled ideology. Israel is an extension to that. Israel isn't an exclusive manner. That's why you had apartheid South Africa. That's why you had enslavement in Africa after they ended slavery in the US 300 years ago. And in other countries too. Not 300 exactly, well, a couple of hundred years ago. But Western countries always played it nice in their own countries and played it dirty abroad. And Israel was one of their dirty works abroad. That's why they wanted it, but they didn't want it to get out of control. They did a lot of dirty work previously, and they did lots of divisions in nations that they controlled to keep the division going on. That's why they covered up Israel. And that's why they're very icky, quite unhappy with the fact that Israel just went berserk now, right? Went on this massive genocide and exposed everything. They don't want that. That goes against everything they do. That's why you see the mainstream media covering it up, spinning everything as much as possible, and the pseudo intellectuals that are cuddled, who are lapdogs for the Zionists, they still cover it up. Because they don't want to have some self-reflection. They don't want to look in the mirror. Right? They don't want to admit to their populations, oh, look, we support them because we're like them. These people in power who support Israel, anyone who supports Israel is like them. Tell me who your friend is, I'll tell you who you are. If you're friends with someone who believes in supremacy based on race or religion, I don't care which religion or which race, by the way, then you're like him. And in this case, you have Israel. A blatant supremacist nation, and they're supporting it. And this support is evident with everything, with the wording, with the fact that they use certain terminology with them that they don't use with the Palestinians, the fact that they have certain words that they use with the Israelis that they don't use with the Palestinians, the fact that they highlight losses and supposed misery with the Israelis that they don't highlight 1% of. When it comes to the Palestinians, it's as if the beheaded babies and bodies, the genuine ones, not the lies that they fabricated before on the Israelis, it's as if they don't exist to them. Why? But they don't view them. They don't view them as anything. They don't care. They've conducted worse atrocities in the past. When you talk about Western powers that support Israel, they're far worse than Israel historically. All you need to do is open the books of history. That's the last 100 years. Really. And don't buy this whole narrative about World War II now, by the way. That thing needs to be dug up. They're telling you about the Nazis, and they themselves protected Nazis. Zionism talks about Nazism, and they collaborated with Nazism. Read about the Havara agreement. That was just what was released. There are so many things that need to be spoken about and revealed that many people don't know. Iran plans saying Indonesia offered peacekeeping troops for Gaza if there's a ceasefire deal, medical assistance with mobile hospitals. If it's hospitals and medical assistance and aid, fine. But the way I say it is, don't no one tell me about peacekeeping forces in Gaza. The peacekeeping forces should be inside of Israel. You should impose a blockade on Israel, sanctions on Israel, and have a peacekeeping process forces in Israel. Why? Because they're the ones who prove that they can commit a genocide. You need to stop them from committing a genocide. Hamas, as a resistance movement, has a legitimate right to act with arms against an occupier. They did that on the 7th of October militarily. The masses of the casualties who died on the 7th of October from Israel were massacred by Israel. And I constantly talk about that and show people evidence and send you all of it. The statements, Be'er Nir Oz, the Nova massacre, the helicopter images, the pilots confirming that, and the fact that Israel will never have a full-on inquiry about the 7th of October, by the way. And they managed to hide and take away so much evidence when it comes to the 7th of October. Fortunately, we have certain things that will never be deleted, and so many people have them ready and they're accessible. Obviously, the mainstream media will try and spin it as much as possible. So, who's the genocidal maniac? Israel. You go send your peacekeeping forces to Israel and call it a regime. Call it an oppressive regime. It's not a government. Call the IDF a terrorist organization and impose sanctions. Send your forces there to dismantle this supremacist, violent terrorist organization and really, right, do what you always say, implement democracy. Thing is, they talk one thing and they do the other. They went to Iraq to implement democracy in Afghanistan, ended up killing millions of people and getting out as if nothing happened. Clearly, it wasn't democracy then and human rights. It was the oil and the opium. So always when you talk about and again, it would be up to the Palestinian people in Gaza, obviously, forces or which forces or what have you. However, that's not the conversation that anyone should be having. Peacekeeping forces, people making sure that no one poses a threat in Israel. In the Israeli government, in the Israeli army there, you should have peacekeeping forces there. Matlas X, thank you so much for your super thanks, saying this event is also the first genocide that is being live streamed. Don't ignore the impact on social media on changing hearts and minds. Yes, the Palestinian people, in effect, are broadcasting and live streaming their genocide on social media. That's why they wanted to cut off the internet as well, so that they don't even document their own genocide. You have people in Gaza documenting their own genocide, and leaders there sitting doing nothing. Leaders of the Arab and Muslim world surrounding Israel doing nothing, just enjoying sports events and yachts and what have you. And leaders in Western countries supporting Israel, supporting the genocide, sending arms, covering up, media support, everything. Jack Ayub, imagine if Israelis and Palestinians make peace with the whole world will be peaceful. If these two can make peace, anybody can make peace. Yes, there is no problem with the concept of peace and the fact that Israelis and Palestinians can make peace. Because who do you make peace with? You don't make peace with your friend. You make peace with your enemy. And you and your enemy you can have wars and massacres and barbarism and everything, but then you make peace. Now we're not very close to peace, to say the least now, and it's not imminent. You have still a genocidal regime in Israel not agreeing to a Palestinian state, completely disregarding everything to do with international law. As a matter of fact, you saw what the ICJ said, so the ICC. You have the ICJ saying they're a genocidal state. You have the ICC having arrest warrants against the leaders of this state. Obviously, it's flawed because they said the Palestinian resistance as well, without proving any evidence, by the way. But hey, you have that. And it would potentially be messy before, I hope not though, but it would potentially get more messy before you reach a solution. And I hope that people in power realize that the only solution would be simple and very straightforward, which is just implementing equality and letting people find their destiny freely with equality across all of Palestine. More Brand saying, how many times have Israel agreed to things and found a loophole to get out of agreements? I wouldn't trust Israel as far as I could throw them, as I am a little old lady. They have many times. That's why when it comes to the Palestinian negotiating side, they want things to be confirmed in writing. They obviously don't trust just simple guidelines, and they want guarantors. So they want the US, Qatar, Egypt, potentially some countries globally, to make sure that this is good. And again, that can happen. Israel can break it as well. Totally agree with that. And I totally agree with the notion not to trust them because they're not trustworthy. And they've done that before, by the way. However, anything towards that direction that would help stop the misery of the Palestinian people in Gaza would be good. But again, like I said, it will not be a long-term solution, just this. But this is just the priority now. And obviously, again, like you said, Israel, they always do, and they can do it again. Teshicom is saying, what was the latest update from Abu Hamza? I haven't really read it, to be honest with you. Abu Hamza is the spokesperson for Saraya al-Quds, which is the armed wing of the PIJ, the second largest resistance movement in Gaza. Let me check if I can get a couple of snippets here, and I'll share them with you. Do we have something? One, two, let me have a look. Okay, he said a couple of things. The demands of the Palestinian resistance to release the Israeli prisoners, because they released a video of one of their the prisoners that was held by them that I spoke about, where I published the video and was taken down by YouTube. Then I uploaded it without the videos, and I uploaded the full version on Rumble. That was their prisoner. It was not held by Hamas. He said they took down 11 Israeli planes. They're most likely UAVs or quadcopters, by the way, not like helicopters or fighter jets. He said, we tell the enemy that the only way to get their prisoners is to withdraw from Gaza stop the war and reach a ceasefire deal. He asked Israelis not to listen to their leadership, saying, don't listen to your leadership, and your return for your settlements will not happen unless there's a complete cessation of the war. He also said that the Palestinian resistance is conducting a very complex, a very security complex battle in protecting the prisoners of the enemy, and that they will reveal more information. He also said that the Palestinian resistance in Gaza is still doing very well, and that the war of attrition will not be anything but regret on the occupation. And we are still with our people solid and resisting, and we turn the battlefields into flames and gunpowder with a revolutionary soul that has not been witnessed on earth throughout the previous decades. And that the Palestinian resistance in the West Bank is conducting an existential war in the West Bank and Gaza, confirming that they are still attacking the enemy. And he said that they had lots of sniping actions against Israel in multiple parts, and mostly with them sniping Israeli soldiers was in Jabalia, which is the northern part of Gaza. He said they took down dozens of Israeli vehicles in Rafah and in Jabalia and Zaytun and the central province with tandem bombs or rockets. And they carried out a lot of explosions, basically, with detonated mines. And he also said that the occupation army is starting to feel like they are sinking in Gaza, and that they will withdraw from Gaza humiliated. And he thanked all of the supporting resistance movements and all of the free people of the world in American universities and in European cities. That was an answer to Tashikoma, who asked what Abu Hamza said, who is the military spokesperson of Saraya al-Quds, or al-Quds Brigades, the armed wing of the PIJ. See, you made me read what he said. I actually didn't read everything. So thank you for that. Ramplin is saying Mossad is accusing Iran of having two organizations called Foxtrot and Rumba in the EU that are planning to attack Israeli embassies. They detained some people. They probably created some of these movements. This is what Israel and the Mossad does in Western intelligence agencies. They create movements like they created ISIS and supported these supposed terrorist people, knowingly or unknowingly, by the way. You need to know how it operates. Some intelligence agencies will employ someone without them knowing. They would act as if there's something else. So if it's an Islamic background, they will act as if they're a scholar or what have you, working for the CIA or the Mossad or whatever, saying that you're committing something noble, and they'll employ them. And Israel probably does that. Why do they do that? To deflect. If you, by the way, look at the previous 2 decades, many of what was labeled terrorist activities, by the way, were acts of deflection. Acts of deflection against genuine things that happen. As a matter of fact, they've tried to do it in this genocide when this one man committed a crime in, what was it, the Euro or something? to take away the attention from what their genocidal state is doing. They even use that for elections. They use it in Britain, they use it in European countries, they use it in the US. Why? To instill fear in people. Oh, no, be scared, don't think about anything else, be scared, and I'm your savior. And this is what they're trying to do against Iran. Iran is the threat, not me. They killed people from every nationality under the sun. They constantly kill Lebanese and Syrians in every single country surrounding them that they don't like. They obviously brutally commit genocide against the Palestinian people. How many aid workers did they kill? And what did the countries of these people who were killed say? Did they condemn? They didn't even condemn. The word condemn doesn't come out of their mouth when it comes to Israel. Even when they assassinate their own people. So that's probably it. Israel's probably creating some of these groups, linking them to Iran to show the West, oh no, look, Iran is the problem. They're threatening you, they're threatening her. The typical garbage, and many fools fall for it. Basai 7 Mahmoud, what are your thoughts on the settlers that are said to be in Gaza at this time? There are no settlements in Gaza. There will be no settlements in Gaza. There were people who were forming temporary tents like outside the wall in Gaza, saying that we're going to go in afterwards, obviously supported by the government, people in the government. But that's clearly not going to happen. Marvin Vergas, Mahmoud, do you condemn Piers Morgan? I do, indeed I do. Little Zionist lapdog, propagandist. Jack Ayub saying, Mahmoud, you're so right. Brother Mahmoud, Israel has nothing to hide. Why don't you let international journalism inside of Gaza and the West Bank? Indeed, why? They told them that they are afraid for their own safety. You will find Western journalists who will sacrifice. Like Rachel Corrie, like who was this Welsh guy that they targeted as well? They killed him in Gaza. Because Rachel Corrie was more of an activist. James Miller, Welsh cameraman, producer, and director, and recipient of numerous awards, including 5 Emmy Awards. He was killed by the Israeli forces while filming a documentary in the Gaza Strip. You have people like James Miller, you have people like Rachel Corrie, you have honorable people who would be willing and take the risk. Like all of the reporters in Gaza took the risk and were targeted deliberately by Israel. Not during only this genocide, but previously as well. I gave you 2 examples here of some Western journalists as well. Alan Johnston was kidnapped by a group aligned with Israel in Gaza called Jayshul Islam. Listen to that. They're called the Army of Islam. Israel supports them. Why? Because they used to fight with Hamas. Who released him? Hamas. A BBC journalist. Because they threatened that move. If you don't release him, we'll have a full throttle confrontation with you. They released him. Hamas released him. When Israel supports the other group that took him. Why? To show that a group called Jayshul Islam is kidnapping a British journalist. And they tried to form an agreement with them now, by the way. Shireen Abu Aqli, one of you, absolutely, Shireen Abu Aqli, what was she doing? What was Shireen Abu Aqli doing? In Jenin, reporting this woman, decades of brave journalism sniped deliberately. And it passes by as if nothing happened, by the way. And what did they do in her funeral? They banned people from sympathizing with her family in her house. She went out of this Christian hospital in Jerusalem, and they started attacking the coffin, beating them. Brutal, barbaric maniacs, I'm telling you. The level of depravity in Israel is unprecedented, by the way, is unmatched. Attacking people at their most vulnerable time, trying to take a woman from hospital in a coffin to the church to go and bury her. What the hell is wrong with you? Absolute depravity. God, the Son, Jesus Christ saves, is saying Israel took out U.S. Yeah, U.S. liberty. They took down, Zionists took down ships full of Jewish immigrants from Europe. Like the Patria. Read about the Patria. Jewish immigrants from Europe were coming to Israel. The British mandate at the time said that you don't have the relevant approvals. What do the Zionist gangs do? They take them down. Jewish immigrants fleeing Europe. When we know the horrible events that were happening in Europe that the Jewish people were facing, and they killed them. Like they kill their own people now. It's called the Patria, Marvin. Marvin Burgess is asking me, Patria. It's labeled as the Patria disaster, by the way, as if it's, it's not something that was done, right, by someone. It's a disaster. But if you type in the Patria disaster, you'll read up about it. Read about the Patria disaster. Read about the Havara agreement. The Patria disaster was a sinking on 25th of November 1940 by the Jewish paramilitary organization Haganah of a French-built ocean liner in the port of Haifa, killing 267 people and injuring 172. Say that they're Jewish immigrants from Europe. Say that. Why do they say that? Even in Wikipedia, they'll try and filter things out. Shinuni, Ted Bundy, and Jeffrey Epstein had a good image. Yes. Paul Whetstone saying Jews are leaving Israel in record numbers. There won't be a Jewish state in 10 years. I'm telling you from now, there is no Israel from now. In terms of Jewish demographics, between the river to the sea, there's a Palestinian majority ever since 2015. And before this war started, Israel used to take into consideration the over 1.2 million Israelis permanently living outside of Israel as a population inside of Israel. Why? Only to show in statistics that we're a Jewish majority country, right? Now, after the 7th of October, you had at least a further 2 million. 1 million verified and confirmed by Israeli statistics from November. At least, we're being conservatives who say another million left, all right? Which means in total, you have approximately just under 5 million, 4 point something million of Jewish Israelis inside of Israel. Faced with 7.6 million Palestinians between the Jordan River to the sea. What does that mean? You have a cult, a small cult, a genocidal cult controlling a majority. And they knew that they are unable to bring more Jewish people. They can't conduct these big aliyahs, they call them, or the arrivals of more Jewish people. They constantly worry about that, to have this Jewish demographic. So they committed the ethnic cleansing attempt in Gaza. That's why. They thought, okay, we can't bring more Jewish people. Let's ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. And they have plans for the West Bank. And they have plans for the Palestinian citizens inside of Israel. Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, told the Palestinian MK 2-3 years ago, Ben Gurion made a mistake in 1948. He should have expelled all of you. Saying what, basically? That there was an ethnic cleansing campaign, and we made a mistake by keeping some of you there. Hinting, oh, you could do that in the future. But you see, instead, they're ethnically cleansing themselves. They want to commit this ethnic cleansing in Gaza, met with unprecedented heroism and bravery by the Palestinian people. And instead, you have the Israeli population leaving, saying, no, thank you so much. You told me this is the safest place for Jewish people. Turned out to be a facade, and the only thing you're doing is killing the Jewish people. White Rose, did you know the Muslim family has keep the Christians from fighting each other for centuries, held the keys? Yeah, that's for one of the churches in Jerusalem. I'm not sure if it's the Holy Sepulchre, but another one. And the keys were held traditionally by a Muslim family for that ancient church. And it's generation on generation, really. I mean, the relationship between Muslims and Christians in Palestine has always been great. Ever since Al-Uhda Al-Umariya, the piece of paper that the Khalifa Umar ibn al-Khattab had when Muslims took control over Jerusalem and Palestine at the time, protecting the rights of everyone, basically. And similar to Salah ad-Din as well, Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi. You see the Christian population in Palestine, when there were constant crusades over Palestine and Jerusalem, they didn't support the crusades. The Christians in Palestine, they used to call them Hurub al-Ifrinja, the wars of the foreigners. They didn't accept the fact that these people act in the name of the cross or Jesus, right? Coming here and killing people. Because we've lived with Muslims across throughout this history, and they know how things are. Similarly with the Jewish communities who were in Palestine before the arrival of the violent Zionism and its ideology. To this day, the Shomronim live in peace, the Samaritans, Samariyun in the West Bank, near Nablus, and they speak Arabic and they look Arab, and they wear this traditional clothing, and they have some of the oldest scriptures of the Torah, and they believe and are supported with this belief by archaeological evidence that the Mount Temple is there in an area called Har Gerizim, not the Mount Temple in Jerusalem, like the radical Zionists believe. So all of that is interesting. And Zionism came to ruin everything, but they didn't succeed to a high extent with the Palestinian population. It didn't really work. They obviously implemented this with the Zionist Jewish community, right? But they weren't successful with the Palestinian people from all backgrounds. Bill Nye, the highest guy. Mahmoud, is it true that no European Holocaust survivors ever served in the Israeli government? If you mean by that the Holocaust survivors from the first generation, I am not entirely sure. However, there are descendants of Holocaust survivors who definitely served in the government. I would need to check with the initial phase. Why? Because there were Holocaust survivors after the Holocaust, after World War II, who even refused the state of Israel. There were Holocaust survivors who came, and after they witnessed what was happening, denounced everything to do with Zionism. read about Avi Schleim, for example. He wrote about it extensively. One of the Israeli historians. But Israel claims that they protect the Holocaust survivors, and they constantly talk about the Holocaust, and they don't talk about the Holocaust. This is what people need to understand. The Holocaust, like Judaism to Zionism, is a tool using this victimhood and this misery for some people so that they can feel protected by this collective Jewish state. They supposedly formed Israel to be a safe haven for Jewish people. What did they create? They created the most dangerous place for Jewish people to live in, and they created a state that tarnishes the image of Judaism in the eyes of people who don't really read through it, because to them they'll think, hold on a second, this state is Jewish and they're committing that. No, thank you. Obviously, people who observe know the fact that they're speaking on behalf of Judaism in the name of Judaism, and what they're doing is not something abnormal. Followers of other religions did that too, in the name of their religions, to have political gain and political control over people, because it's easy to control people under the banner of religion. So they still speak about them. They have the Holocaust museum in Israel as well. And all of that is to just create this psychological fear in people that we always faced Holocaust. I always need to be here to protect you. Protect you where? In Palestine? You faced the Holocaust in Germany, Habibi. Did we commit the Holocaust? We didn't have a problem ever with Jewish people, ever in Palestine. It was always fine. Jewish communities, Christian, Muslim, normal. You had a problem in Europe, exporting the problem to Palestine and oppressing them. And some of these people, you see some people documenting these settlers in the West Bank, squatters. Oh, why do you do that? Oh, because we faced the Holocaust. What does someone 2,000-3,000 miles away have to do with it? With the Holocaust that happened in Germany. Now, obviously, many Holocaust survivors say that, and I spoke with many of them. And I appreciate these people because they're vocal too. They would be Holocaust survivors, and they'll tell you, no, I didn't happen. I'm not agreeing to this concept. Marvin is saying, I understand you saying no more Israelis will come to Israel. Will Zionist billionaires allow Israel to go? Will they bribe people to come back? Thoughts? Look, if you look at the squatter establishment, the settler establishment in the West Bank, that's primarily pushed with money from America. You will have people, say that you're Jew. They could be criminals, by the way, thugs. Oh, go live there, you'll get some perks in Israel. They're enabled, obviously, armed, do whatever they like, steal lands, and protected by the government. Not many people fall into that trap. Israel constantly struggles to bring people. Some people say that, Jonathan Pollard, who was an Israeli spy, imprisoned in the US, released not long ago. They said that Israel used him to pass information from the US to the Soviet Union at the time in return for the Soviet Union to allow some of its population to emigrate to Israel, have a deal with them. Because one of the things that boosted the Jewish demographics of Israel is the people who came from the Soviet Union, which turned out, by the way, that many of them weren't even Jews, and they were still Christians, and they were even vocal about it. But Israel claim they're Jews, or say that you're Jew, whatever. We need the population here. After that, it's an unappealing place to go and live in, with such high levels of threat and lack of security and supremacy and ugliness. So I don't think any amount of money will push the number required to revive that. Sabrina saying, Professor Mahmoud, oh, you're giving me the title professor. I'm no professor, at least, you know, I don't have the, but thank you for that. I learned a lot about Israel and Palestine from your stream, FK Mainstream Media. Thank you so much. And I officially received the title professor from you now, by the way, because I definitely didn't have that title before. Thank you. Donna's saying there were Jewish communities in Iran and some participated in the funeral of the Iranian president. Yes, why shouldn't they? They've been in Iran for so many years. And they love the Iranian government and they have good relations. Israel doesn't like that, by the way. Whenever you see images of the Jewish communities with Iran, they don't like it. They don't like it. Okay, we'll wrap it up there. Again, thank you so much for everyone who participated. Apologies in advance if I missed some of your contribution messages that you contributed in. And I'll obviously be here regularly anyway. So thank you so much for participating and sharing your valuable insights. Also, thank you so much for everyone who sent super thanks. Thank you so much. I have Munzer, Sarah, Manuel, Samantha, Hassan, Stephen, Rebecca, Chocolate, Daniela, Marvin, Manfred, Matlas, and Ray. Thank you very much for your super thanks. I really appreciate you and your contribution in your work and your viewership and participation. Apart from that, have a lovely evening. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Sleep tight, relax. And I will hopefully be with you very soon in the next video. Take care, everyone, and peace be on all of you. Salam, and I'll see you very soon.